Hey everybody, it's Kendra. Welcome to my channel if you're new, and welcome back if you've been here before. My video today is going to be sort of a recap and my final thoughts on my gardens from this summer. If you have been following my channel along this summer, you noticed I posted a few garden updates. So I did 3 community garden plots this summer. I had one plot at a smaller community garden about 5 minutes from where I live, and then I did 2 side-by-side plots at a larger community garden, probably about a 10 to 15 minute drive from our apartment. So I liked both of them. I like the smaller plot, but I will not go back to that smaller plot next year, just because the soil was really full of clay and really heavy, and I felt like it was a little bit more difficult to grow things there, but I felt like I had much better luck at the larger plot. Plus, I just really loved the people I met at the larger community garden. Made a couple cool gardening pals, so that was super fun too. So with that being said, even though I didn't feel like the smaller plot was super productive, it still was productive, and the larger plot was awesome. I felt like I had so much produce. I'm so grateful for how productive everything was, how much produce I ended up getting, and I'm also super proud of myself because this was the first time I've done anything like this by myself. I gardened when I was a kid with my mom and my grandma, and I've always kind of had plants in pots on balconies, but doing actual garden plots in the ground is a totally different story. So yeah, learned a lot. I was constantly researching stuff, and also I spent a ton of time actually in the gardens. So that brings me to another point. If you have this romantic idea of starting a garden and you just think it's going to be like so magical and so romantic and amazing and fabulous, yeah, knock those notions out of your noggin right now, because gardening's really hard. It's a lot of work. I mean, there definitely are ways to make it less work and, stuff you can do to help, prevent weeds from growing. But gardening's a lot of work. There were plenty of days, I'd wake up at like 5:30, eat something really quick, and then go to the garden because it was going to be 90 degrees that day, and I had, at least 2 or 3 hours of work that I needed to get done before it got super hot. So gardening is definitely hard physically. It also takes a lot of time. I spent a lot of time actually planning my garden, like where I was going to put stuff, kind of planning like the timing of planting seeds. Pretty much everything I planted, with the exception of a few herbs and a few flowers that I just bought like in their little pots at the nursery. I planted pretty much everything from seed. So you really got to do a lot of timing with that, figure out like when to plant it so that it's big enough to put outside when the temperature is appropriate, but you don't want it to be too big and then like have it be like all root bound in whatever container you've planted it in. Anyway, so gardening, here's my point, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of time. Also, it can be pretty expensive, especially if it is your first year. So as this was my first year, I didn't really have tools. I think I had a shovel. I think I had one like kind of pathetic old shovel I dug out from like my parents' woodshed. I can't remember. And I had a rake. I had a rake and a shovel. But I needed other tools. I think I bought 4 or 5 other, decent sized tools. I also had to buy fencing. We have a definite problem with rabbits down here, and I love them and they're so cute, but I don't want them in my garden. So I had to buy a lot of chicken wire fencing for both of my plots. Had to buy like the fence posts. I mean, I would say on fencing materials alone, it was probably close to $250. I won't have to spend that next year, so that's great. I mean, I have the materials already and I can just reuse them. I, pulled out the chicken wire fencing and rolled it up, cleaned it off, rolled it up. So I'll use that again. But the fencing and the tools were pretty expensive. Seeds, I probably spent around $100. But one thing with seeds is that apparently seeds, like you can use, for several years. Like they still stay kind of good. So I do have a lot of seeds left from this season. And then I also saved some seeds for next season as well. So I would say next year, I mean, I'm going to obviously buy new varieties of stuff just to play around with, but I think I can probably get seeds for maybe $60, like $50-$60 or less, just depending what I feel like experimenting with. Oh, a couple other things I bought, a ton of tomato cages. I think I had 6 think I had bought 6 tomato cages like a few years ago. So I had those. I got some of my grandma's old tomato cages from, ages ago. And then I bought a bunch of tomato cages. So I bought those. I bought a few bags of like worm compost from Costco, a few bags of some type of like soil, compost. It wasn't necessarily compost. It was some type of mix, but actually like for in-ground use. So I did buy a few things like that. My dad built me 2 gates for my gardens and then also 3 trellises. So those, I will definitely be using all of those next year. I think because I'm going to only do 1 garden next year, I'm going to use both of my gates and have like 1 entrance on each side. Just, if I have to do something on the other side, I don't have to walk all the way around. So I'm going to utilize everything that I have from this year. So for next year, as far as stuff I'm going to need to buy, I will have to buy new trellis netting to go over my trellis structures. And that's super cheap. That's like $3 or $4 a net. Probably some worm compost. I don't know. I found some really good worm compost at Costco this year. So I might pick up some more of that. I still have my worms and they are doing great. And I think my worms really helped the garden. I dumped a ton of worms into the gardens and then also just had a ton of compost I dumped into the gardens. So that was very, very helpful as well. Great fertilizer. I also will buy some bone meal. From the research I found out this summer, I felt like one of the issues I was having with some of my produce was a lack of calcium, I believe. And a lot of my research was saying bone meal. So I think that'll be kind of like the main amendment that I put in my soil next year. Another thing that obviously I had kind of considered when I started this project, but didn't really understand the full extent of it. When you garden, generally you end up with a lot of produce at once. Like your tomatoes are generally already at the same time. Unless you stagger stuff, which I did. Like I staggered my beans. I had a few things kind of staggered, but a lot of it, boom, it came all at once. So that kind of led me to figure out like, what am I going to do? I cannot eat 50 pounds of tomatoes right this second. How do I preserve them? I can't eat all these beans. I can't eat all this kale. So I really spent a lot of time, particularly in August. Like you have not seen me on YouTube for a while because I have been so busy with this garden and food preservation and all of this and other crazy things going on in my life. But it's really time consuming to just preserve this stuff. I had never really done canning before, so I learned how to water bath can. I learned a ton about freezing stuff. So yeah, if you're thinking about gardening, awesome, but also think like, okay, what am I going to do if I have just an abundance of beans or an abundance of tomatoes? Because you don't want to waste that stuff. You don't want to spend all of this time and energy growing this stuff and then just have it rot and just go to waste. You can always give it to people, and I did give some to people, but I definitely tried to preserve as much as I could. So as far as next year and my ideas on what I'm actually going to plant, this summer I did 4 varieties of tomatoes, and I would say total, I probably had close to 30 plants between the 2 gardens. One of the varieties was this terrible green variety, which, it was just awful. It tasted so gross. Obviously I will not be doing that one. And I would say I'll probably cut the amount of tomato plants that I do in half. Maybe I'll do like 20. I don't know. I do have a couple other varieties I really want to play with. But yeah, if I'm only doing the 2 plots in the larger space, I should probably cut down on the number of tomato plants that I do. Also cucumbers. I had so many cucumbers this summer. My husband keeps telling me, don't do so many cucumbers, don't do so many cucumbers, please, please, please. So I probably will do fewer cucumbers. I do want to try a couple other varieties of cucumbers. So maybe I'll do like half of what I did last summer, but just more varieties. We'll see. Summer squash, I felt like I had a good amount. Beans, I felt like I had a good amount. I did 2 varieties of beans. I did a purple one and then a yellow wax bean. I can't remember if I have purple seeds left, but I definitely preferred the flavor of the yellow wax beans. So I had 3 plantings of beans in the larger space and 1 planting at the smaller space. I'll probably do either 2 or 3 plantings, just, a couple weeks apart. But I would say maybe just the yellow ones. If I still have seeds for the purple ones, I'll do those too, but I definitely preferred the flavor of the yellow wax beans. And then also I felt like they were just more resistant to insects. Definitely had an issue with Japanese beetles, and they just destroyed the purple beans. But I felt like they didn't really touch the yellow beans, like the plants. They didn't actually eat the beans, but they definitely ate the leaves. I also tried to grow beets, but I think I just grew them too late. This was another thing I didn't really understand about gardening. I didn't know anything about cold weather crops. To me, I've always just thought, oh, it needs to be warm to grow stuff. And I learned that that's totally wrong, and there are so many crops that can grow in cold weather. Like even when it's freezing out, there's so many things that can grow, and I totally missed that window of opportunity right when the garden opened. Totally should have planted my cabbages, my radishes, beets, lettuces, spinach. Should have planted that all super, super early. Should have done that back in April. I didn't plant any of that stuff till like mid to late May, and by that time it was just a little bit too hot for some of that stuff. So I did beets this year, planted them late. They were a bit wonky. Just did not have a very, very good flavor. I might skip out on beets next year, haven't decided. Radishes, I did have pretty good luck with one variety of radish. I did plant some of those Chinese red meat radishes, the watermelon ones, later in the season, hopefully as a fall crop, but I had to rip out my gardens last week. So those did not actually get like enough time in the ground, but I love them, and hopefully I can grow them next year. Cabbage, yes, I will grow cabbage again. I totally had not planned to grow cabbage, but I received some free cabbage seeds. And I think I planted 13 plants in the ground, and I ended up with about 6 or 7 cabbages, and they were great, and I've used all of them. So cabbage was my one happy surprise, or one of my happy surprises this season. I may also try to grow Napa cabbage because I am considering making a whole bunch of kimchi next fall. So one thing that I had not planned to grow when I started, but then I just had a little bit of extra space here and there in the gardens, I planted spaghetti squash in those spaces, and spaghetti squash needs a lot of space, but I also planted it a little bit too late. Like beginning of July. So I definitely want to do some spaghetti squash, but I want to obviously plant that earlier. I'm also really considering doing a couple types of like pumpkins or butternut squash. And when I have this conversation, this makes me think I need not only 2 plots, but I need 4 plots. So we will return to that has yet to be determined. Do I do 2 plots or do I do 4? I really want 4. Also, I grew melons. I had 2 varieties of cantaloupes and 1 variety of watermelon. The watermelons grew pretty well, but the flavor was not that great, and I have read mixed reviews about the type of watermelon that I grew. It was called Charleston Gray. It just kind of felt like it didn't have a lot of flavor, but it grew fairly well. So I would like to grow another variety of watermelon, but just something that, has like more like a sweeter kind of reputation. The 2 types of melons, cantaloupes that I grew were great. I had one called Wisconsin Pride, and then one called Petit Gris de Reine, so that's a French heirloom. Both were super delicious, but holy cats, those things ripen just like with the flip of a light switch. I was gone. I was teaching at a camp for a week, and while I was gone, most of the French heirlooms ripened and exploded, and I lost a whole bunch of them. And then I also did have a problem with chipmunks getting into my garden and eating some of my melons. So I do want to grow cantaloupes again because I love the flavor, and a good cantaloupe, it's just like nothing else. It's so, so, so delicious and so sweet. But I need to be careful with the chippies. Also, I do plan to grow kale. I actually was able to freeze a whole bunch of kale, like blanch and freeze a ton of kale. So that's what I put in my smoothies in the morning, and it's awesome. I do plan to do lettuce again. I will try to do spinach. I don't know. I just had 0 luck with spinach. Again, I think I planted it way, way, way too late when it was too hot. But I'd love to have freshly grown spinach. That would be amazing. Also, I did carrots this year. I did sort of find that the soil here was just a little bit heavy for carrots. I got a lot of carrots. Like I did have decent luck with carrots, but I'm not going to focus too much on carrots. Like if they grow, cool. If not, whatever. I'll go to the co-op and buy some for an affordable price. Also for next season, right when the garden opens, which is generally around April 15th, I plan to get over there immediately and put up my fence and just get some of these cold weather crops in right away. So there you go. Those are my thoughts. That's my recap about my garden. I loved it so much. It was so satisfying. Like, it was so much work and my body killed, and I complained so much about how badly my body hurt and how achy I was. But there's nothing as satisfying and rewarding as making like a beautiful Greek salad, you know, with cucumbers and tomatoes from your garden, and making tomato soup, and just, oh, like, just the flavor is just bursting, and it's just, oh, it's so amazing. Like, having this amazing quality organic produce that you grew with your own two hands, it's just so satisfying. Also, if you have a garden, you know, and you can sort of relate to any of these things or have any other additional things to add, please leave me a comment down below. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video.